Everybody, thanks very much for coming to another one of our weekly TESS seminars. We're getting close to the end of the semester, and then of course we'll have a bit of a break and then be starting back up for one more semester for the end of the year. We've had some slightly different kinds of talks this semester, and it's been really good, very enriching, I think, to be talking to people who come at us with backgrounds on Earth systems change and marine environments and a lot of the issues in social sciences and cultural issues that, which we might call more typical kinds of environmental scientists, we probably don't get enough exposure to. So it's really nice to see this kind of rich program developing. And today we've got something a little bit different, and we're really pleased though, and that is we're going to have a group from the Jabukai Theater give us a brief introduction for what's called a calling to country. And Dennis Hunter will be coordinating this, and he's the cultural engagement officer for the Jabukai Aboriginal Corporation. And this thing that they do, this calling to country, is how Jabukai people introduce themselves when they're moving to just talk to someone else in their country. So, and if hopefully, Dennis, I've explained that okay, or paraphrased that. And anyway, Dennis and the group from Jabukai, thank you.
Jadi rombak, kalau penyenda, engkau pada jago, awak malam garing, mun bamu, awak kangen, bola lah, anja, undi, awak awak batapan, pada ugo, karun nanya, bunga yung balon, awak pun berbara, mau kerja bagai. Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Hunter, and I'm the Cultural Development Officer, currently working with Doughnut Corporation. My position there, many cultural activities, do a lot of community engagements with other corporations, Europeans, and neighbouring northern tribes known as the Mossman area, the Kuga-Yalangi. And as you notice here, this is not new. Sadly, we don't get welcome to the country. What we do is more tradition and more customized, but call it the country. So when we went to a certain area, we have a white stone. Now this stone here, it's from one of our communities. The Paul stays in Coranda. And this water here is from the Barron River. Everybody know the Barron River? Starts up in the Atman Tablelands, Penrith, comes all the way down through to Coranda. Coranda is called Ngunbai, the land of the platypus. And it comes all the way through Dindon National Park, known as Barron Falls. It's a very famous tourist attraction there. Comes down towards Lake Placid and towards up to Matrix Beach, meaning the open ocean. Jabukai means rainforest. We are the people of the rainforest, and we are part of the Jabukai tribe. Now the tribal boundary starts from the inlet of Cairns, where the terminal is, the reefs and islands, Fitzroy, we call Gugubara, Green Island, we call Wanyami, the spirit of the dead. On that island there was an initiation place where young men become men with the cuttings on their bodies, known as initiation. So when we reached the age of puberty, because we didn't know our ages, therefore we were from 16 to 21, the cuts would summarize what knowledge you gained at a young age. So when you became 16, you will get a sword. So what do we get today when you turn sweet 16? Yeah. You turn 21, you get a 21 key. Us, we get a shield. So it's telling you a little bit about the status, but the cuttings on your bodies. more cuts you have in your body, more higher ranking you was in your status. You join the military, you join the Navy, you join the cadets, the Army Reserve, what do they serve you? Stripes. What does the stripes signify? Ranking. Same with the cuts in our bodies, to put simply. All right, so with the white stone, down to a certain place, and rubbing out body sweat on the stone to let the country, the water know who are we as individuals, and letting us know who we belong to and where we come from. Right, so we encourage each of you to do the same in that same manner. To introduce yourself to double that country. Is that your own term? So you're going to have that experience of one of the oldest ways of introducing yourself to double that country.
Never too old to learn something new.
What's on the floor too, because I'm sweating. Thank you, guys.
Out of the other.
Thank you very much. So, as I've heard something there, you learn new things every day. And so you've just witnessed and participated in one of the oldest and ancient ways of introducing yourself to country. Right, as I mentioned about welcome to country, you hear it all over Australia. We're probably one tribe out of many that's touching back on the traditional way. Right, so yeah, so you've actually, you introduced so many friends here, they'll say, how you going there, brother? But you're doing it symbolically in this way. All right, but I'd just like to thank each and every one of you. Thanks Paul here, because we see him nearly every day where I work. But thanks for, for participating in that part of that. It's more of a journey about learning how to introduce yourself to double our country. And may you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. You might find this difficult to believe, but that's actually the first time we've ever started a TESS seminar like this. So you people need to loosen up a little bit. This is the first time we've ever. Okay, it's really a pleasure to introduce Michelle Maloney. She's a lawyer. She's one of the few people I've seen who's actually gotten a PhD in law. To be honest, I wasn't sure you could actually do that. I mean, I suppose you could. That's obvious. Oh, yeah. That's a joke. Of course you can. Well, I didn't know that. I thought you just became a very high-paid lawyer or something like that. Michelle is a co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and she's also a senior adjunct fellow at Griffith University at the Law Future Center there. She has a number, her background and her history is incredibly rich and diverse. And really, I would just suggest go to her website and look at the incredible array of different things that she's done. Everything that I've seen about her has focused on in some level of environment, sustainability, very much into issues of, I guess you say, social justice and inclusion, a lot of issues like that. So I won't try to preempt anything other than to say Michelle's going to be, the first part of her talk is creating systems change in a time of crisis. And I think we probably actually are in a time of crisis right now and really need to think about how our systems and our behavior can adapt to this very challenging world that we find ourselves in now. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here in person. And for those of us who perhaps are joining via Zoom, we have no idea. Hello out there. I'd like to acknowledge the Jabbergai peoples and I'm really grateful that the guys were able to call us to country in that way. I've done similar processes in parts of the Northern Territory, so it's a delight to be doing it symbolically here, even if we're not at the waterhole or at the creek. So I am juggling two screens, so I hopefully will be able to do that without looking in the wrong direction. So thanks so much to everyone who helped me come up to Cairns for this trip, and a special thank you to the James Cook Uni for hosting us today. I would like to acknowledge that I've also got my lovely companion work colleague and off-sider at the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, Christina Myers, here with me today. So if at the end of the talk, if you did want to have a chat with either of us, we're both fully involved in the work that AELA does. So the colon after my creating systems change in a time of crisis is, can we build earth-centred societies and economies that thrive within ecological limits? The short answer is, of course we can, because human beings and our governance systems are totally a social construct. We can make stuff up as we wish. Can we do it in time with climate change bearing down on us? That is obviously the big question. And one of the reasons I wrote my little blurb in a very optimistic way is that a lot of my friends and colleagues are in really on downers at the moment. Everyone who cares about the living world is feeling it. You know, COVID was just another kick after the horrors of the 2019-2020 bushfires. But for many of us, those of us who are a bit older in the teeth perhaps, who've been working on these issues for decades, let alone the young'uns who are coming through, facing a future that I didn't have to worry about at that age, it is a very strange time to be alive. And in my talk, I mentioned that it will be inspiring. I don't want to cast any aspersions that I will inspire you. What I want to do is share with you some of the really remarkable movements and other people who are out there in Australia and around the world doing really, truly inspiring things. And if any of the work that I talk about today is of interest to you or inspires you, then I'm truly grateful. And if it doesn't, definitely have a look at all the other folks that we're involved with, because so many great people out there. It's like this remarkable spider web of people doing really cool things. So I'm going to move through a lot of slides. I'm going to try to use it like telling a story rather than PowerPoint you to death. Most of them are pickies with just a few words. And I've asked Paul to keep me on track for about 40 minutes because I think that'll do the trick. All right, so here we go. Can we build earth-centred societies and economies? I believe we can. I'm going to quickly mention who I am because I learnt from a lot of my Aboriginal mates the proper way to introduce yourself is actually talk about where you're from, who you know, who you're connected to. So I'll talk a little bit about me, but not much. It's not that exciting. And I won't dwell on the horrors that we face with the climate changing world. I think if you're here and you're studying or you're thinking about these issues, you know. What I will do, though, is ask how we got here, because your own analysis of how we got here and what brought us to this place where we are damaging the climate, we are wiping out biodiversity, we're doing a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things to each other through social injustices. Your analysis of how we got here will inform your action or the things that you do. So I'm going to share with you my analysis and some of the things that are important in my world and the things that we look at. How do we stay positive in the face of all of this? I'm going to come to that at the end with final thoughts. And then I'm just going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing in the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and in the new Economy Network Australia, or NENA, and a very groovy organisation called Future Dreaming, which I'll talk about in a minute. And if time permits, I'd love to run through a couple of slides on the Green Prince approach, which is what AELA's been working on for a couple of years now, to bring all the good stuff together, to help people actually go, how do we bring all the good things together and, you know, scale up the good stuff and push away the bad stuff particularly in a climate where we have federal governments that not only don't care about the living world, are blatantly acting in a way that is against the health of its people in the living world. So my bias, my work is very much informed by a deep belief in ordinary people like me, the folks who are on the edges of society, sitting in little NGOs or sitting in academic institutions. Not that you're on the edge of society, I apologise. But, you know, the folks who aren't in the machinery of government, because unfortunately, and one of the reasons I talk about how did we get here, our history, the legacy of our institutional structures, the history of our culture as non-Indigenous Australians is deeply imbued in institutional and cultural structures that just want to treat the living world as property. And we are living the dream. We are now reaching the pinnacle of that extreme achievement. But anyway, more of that in a minute. About me. I am just going to use this photo to mention that I grew up in the middle of Queensland. I'm a bush kid, born and raised out in Longreach and Barcaldine. And that is the beautiful Alice River. She rarely looks that good. Most of the time she's empty, but the sand is also beautiful. And the weir keeps a little bit of water there since the whitefellas built the concrete. But I was very proud when I grew up that I was fourth generation in Barcaldine. Fourth generation, wow. And when I grew up, we didn't learn about anything in our education system other than European history started in 1788 and so on and so forth, rolling through the old white men who explored and marched across the continent. It wasn't until I got to university that I was able to learn and unlearn a whole bunch of things which I now hold very dear. And again, I'm trying to keep today upbeat. So normally I can blast forth into the litany of destruction that the whitefellas brought across the Inangai people where I grew up that I didn't even know were there until I got to university and read about them. But I would just like to acknowledge that I was growing up in a place where all of our communities were reliant on things like bore water. You know, we were living from the earth, from the water coming up out of the earth. We couldn't rely on rainwater. We were a bunch of bushies. And I'm really proud of the fact that so many of my family are still out there. I'd also like to acknowledge I now live, work and play in Brisbane. So I'd like to acknowledge the Yagara Turrbal peoples on whose land I live, work and play in North Brisbane. And that is a beautiful picture of the water lilies in a nearby Nudgee waterholes where I walk my dogs. So I'm a country kid. I went to uni in Canberra in the late 80s, pre-internet. If anyone's young in this room, I can't barely see without my glasses. We used to have to use catalogues and such and little cards and wander around looking for real books and journals. Shocking, I know. But I struggled doing a law degree because I was a country kid and most of it didn't seem to make sense to me. And I left my law degree as fast as my legs could carry me. As soon as I finished it, I didn't want to, but I did. And then I wandered off and worked with Indigenous mates in central Queensland, kind of wandered into community development and particularly community capacity building, then did the usual privileged white fella thing and went travelling around the world, discovered that everything I wanted was exactly where it was, where I left it, came home, settled into the work that I've now been trying to build over the last few years. And I think sometimes I look at my age group and even the journey we've had through education is perhaps almost typical of what we're seeing in Australia now, this awakening by so many non-Indigenous people about our own history and the causes and its impact on our life and our culture and our future. So the problems we're facing, this is going to be really quick because I think we all know it. But what I like is this image. This to me is how the complexity of industrialised societies felt before I came across earth laws. And I'll talk in a moment about why that particular framing helped me find a bit of sanity and find a way to kind of work through the chaos of what we had created. But when I saw that image, I thought, yes, that is how I felt in my 20s as a caring person who really didn't know where to start unravelling things. But the problems we face, I'm sure everyone here knows about planetary boundaries. If you don't know about the concept of planetary boundaries, please do Google it. I don't have a lot of time today to go into the details. I'm sure many of you know it, but when Johan Rockström and Will Steffen, our beloved Australian scientist Will Steffen and many others worked together to release in 2009 kind of the first effort by Western society to actually quantify the healthy planetary boundaries of life on Earth, it was a remarkable feat. And for many of us looking at how do we live within our ecological limits, planetary boundaries became this really important outer limit, this way to say to people, look, we need to live within our limits, and here's one place that you can start to actually get a feel for the planet as a whole and the Earth as a system. But the bad news is We are breaching some of these safe operating spaces, and I'm sure there are many more scientists than there are lawyers who know all about this, so I'm not going to go into much detail. But we know we're in trouble, not just climate change, but the biodiversity loss that we're experiencing around the world, and many other impacts are very real. And the other aspect of this is that we haven't just trashed the planet to make all human beings happy and safe. All human beings are not happy and safe. We've managed to trash many of our planetary systems while also ensuring that 1% of the population are beyond imaginably financially wealthy, and the other half, or the other 99%, share it out in strange and unusual ways. But I won't, again, go into the detail of this. I often wheel out all these stats to remind us of how much work we have to do to be fair and just to each other, let alone to the living world. But there's a great book, I think it was written quite a few years now, but it was called Stuffed and Starved. And it was sort of documenting the first time in human history we had just as many people dying of obesity-related diseases as we did having people die of starvation. A very bizarre planet indeed. And so what we're seeing is both the pushing of all of our ecological boundaries, but also at the same time, many, many people don't have enough, and many, many people have too much. And the call for degrowth, whether you like it or hate it, is an important one. This idea of deliberately contracting the very rich and the very rich societies that they live in, so that others may live. How did we get here? This is Michelle Maloney's 3-minute history lesson. I know that you probably know this, but I find that reminding ourselves a little bit about the history of humanity can be a good reminder of what we have to do today to undo some of it. So when you look at this map, this is a top-level map done by the Australian Koala Foundation a couple of years ago now, in 2017, and it was representing many, many, many other layered maps. But this map tells a huge story, that the vegetation and the forest cover that was here when the colonial folks arrived versus what was here in 2016. And we know that the white is either permanently removed or completely changed landscape, vegetation and landscape. And I'm not going to go into the science of that. I'm going to ask a simple question. How did that level of destruction occur? And what beliefs, worldviews, and governance systems lie within a society that think that that's acceptable? Because so often we take all of this damage as accepted or normal or real, and we have to fix it up later. But the key question I've always asked since I was a little kid is, why do we cause so much harm? And I'm going to come back to this towards the end when we think about the different governance systems that human beings can choose to use to look after place and to look after each other. And the other question I always like to ponder, and I'm working on a book which I can talk about a bit later if we have time, with Mary Graham, a really remarkable Indigenous philosopher and political scientist, is how did this remarkable, beautiful country, a place that I love being part of, end up so very, very different to the culture that was there before it? Why has it taken us so long as the colonisers to wake up to what we've been doing? And I don't do that in a bashing way. I'm a descendant of the Irish that came over. There's probably a little bit of the English organisers and administrators in my blood to have done a law degree, and I'm not out to bash my own culture. I just constantly ponder how profoundly different these two places are. All right, so understanding how we got here matters. And when I'm giving lectures, particularly to younger folk, I always try to remind people that the problems are much older than neoliberalism. You know, a lot of people point to the kind of the wave, the tsunami in the 1980s with Reagan and Thatcher, the heightened commodification and marketization of everything. But that was just building on the back of hundreds of years of capitalism anyway. The great acceleration that began in the 50s, that's definitely, you can point to that as a really important part of the problem, and I'll talk a bit more about it in a minute. The European Industrial Revolution and its phenomenal capacity to pull up everything that was left in the soil. Of course, that's been a huge problem, not the soil, bedrock, all the fossil fuels that were pulled up. But the mindset that drove all of that was much older again. And the European imperialism and colonisation since the 1600s is one of the key ideas we still need to challenge today. And people don't feel comfortable to do that until we start talking about exploration into space. A couple of colleagues and I drafted a declaration for the rights of the moon in light of the fact that a whole bunch of billionaires had their eye on it and governments were just letting it happen. And I've been on a couple of panels where I've had really vehement space engineers telling me that I'm anti-person. And I said, I'm not anti-person, I'm not anti-people, I'm pro-moon. And I would just sit there, and I'm self-declared grumpy old lady now. I'm allowed to. I've earned this place. I'm 51. What makes us think we have a right to go up there and dig everything up? And doesn't that just remind us exactly of the attitudes we had and still have when we came here and what we're continuing to do? And by we, I say, of course, there's difference in humanity. There's earth-loving, tree-hugging folk like me, and then there's folks who own big mining companies that blow stuff up and dig things up without any angst whatsoever. So these ideas, the cultural ideas that are embedded deeply in our bones and our DNA, really matter. And I am shocked to still be having conversations with people that have to actually be reminded that expansionism and extractivism has an end game. And we're kind of into that end game now. But then other people like Derek Jensen and other fabulously radical writers talk about the shift from hunter-gatherer societies into large-scale ag in 10,000 years ago as the beginning of us becoming terraformers. But whatever phase you look back to, I always like to remind people that the European expansionist mode is actually still alive and well, unfortunately, in much of what we're up to. So again, just a quick thinking exercise. Try to imagine what it must have been like on planet Earth in about 1400. All the Europeans were out trading, but they stayed home largely. They mostly just invaded each other, maybe skitty-scattied across the top of the planet. But we had thousands and thousands of villages, towns, settlements, First Nations, it's a sovereign term used today, but not in the olden times. But we had an abundance of cultural and biodiversity. The European expansionism from the 1600s brought us to a different way of being. And from the founding of the British East India Company in 1600, building on top of the corporate creations of things in the Catholic Church and beyond, we saw a significant change. So the diversity that we saw, the small fragmentation of peoples and life, was changed by the colonisation. This is just one example. This is the British, 1918. Everything red or pink was controlled by them. And you see down there, you see Australia controlled by this British act of colonisation and the mindset that came with it. So colonisation does refer to the large-scale movement of population. And in settler colonial states, that's held up by the institutional structures as well. And why am I harping on about this? Because history matters, and because some of the stuff we still have to undo today are these very weird and unusual legal and governance systems that we've inherited. Imperialism, we know that that is where nation states know and think they have a right to go and invade places. And the thing that it left us with, the thing that comes back to people like me who are interested in earth laws, is this very strange and arbitrary way that Australia was created by colonial powers. And in other talks and in other workshops, we dig down into where, legally speaking, did the patriarchy come from? I mean, feminists will bang on about it, but there was a time when women were just the property of men in English society. That's patriarchy extreme, right? Some of these ideas are still in our society, but the top-down hierarchical nature of our laws, the top-down hierarchical nature of our politics, this all matters. These are exactly the barriers we're facing today in trying to make governance changes and shifts. The 1950s saw, and I'm not going to speak to them, but if you've never heard of the Great Acceleration, just Google it or Google Will Stephan, and you will see that the combination of, in fact, I think I had it there, the expansionist mindset, which has continued and continued through the colonial, through the corporate, through the dominance of the elite, to the technological capacity after the Second World War that just went crazy, and then US imperialism. And here we are from the 1950s, everything ramping up, and this is the escalation that has caused so much of the trouble that we now have to tackle. So how do we respond? I'm sure you know that there are a gazillion remarkable researchers, scientists, NGOs, lots of great people out there doing really important work. And that's why I'm actually quite grateful and humbled that you're here listening to me ramble on, because there's tons of good people out there doing good things. All I'd like to do is share with you some of the work that AELA, NINA and Future Dreaming are up to. And again, I will try to clutch at the optimism and the inspiration of others to keep us all afloat in strange times. So the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, earthlaws.org.au, that's my baby, that's my main hat. She has in fact auspiced, I like to say, given birth to several other organisations, but we'll talk about them. AELA's goal is to help people in industrialised society understand these root causes of the current ecological crisis. We may never get it right, but we can certainly try to unpick some of that knowledge and shift our governance systems from human-centred to earth-centred. I'm sure you've all seen those lovely images. I flogged them off Facebook. I'm sure everyone else has seen them too. Sometimes they're depicted as ego and eco, but really these deep analysis of this human-centred way is a part of the work we do. Just a reminder, what is governance? If we had time, I'd do this wonderful thing called the pizza dilemma. We don't have time, but it's a way of making people aware of how we carve stuff up and how we work together. But in really simple terms, without any jargon, that Westerners love jargon. Consultants make their money out of making things confusing and then selling it back to you in a simple form. But governance is as old as we are. It's when you get a couple of people in a room arguing over that bone, or a wife or a husband. The rules we make to work together, the way we organise ourselves, how we make decisions, how we allocate resources, how we allocate power, and it's all underpinned by what we value. So AELA's inspiration is twofold. We were formed in 2012 by a group of really disgruntled and probably terrified environmental lawyers, myself and 5 others. We were very interested in the work of Thomas Berry, a Western deep ecologist who coined the term earth jurisprudence. Excuse me, and I'll talk about him in a tick. But from a very early age, I had also been interested in Indigenous culture, even though I wasn't taught anything at school and didn't know it. I had a lot of mates and was trying to grapple with stuff at university and beyond. But in the last few years, the remarkable work and the writings and the thinkings of Mary Graham and Anne Polina have also become really, really important structural reform goals, to put them in a really simple way. So AELA's inspiration is earth jurisprudence and what Anne Polina would call first laws, and what Mary Graham might refer to as the relationist ethos. The very deep, deep understanding that we are merely an organism of some sort, whether you think of that in spiritual or sacred terms, or you think of it in scientific terms. They all say the same thing. We are just one member of the earth community, and I find that miraculous. You know, if you sit there for a minute and breathe in and out, we are all sitting here today because of an unbroken chain of life since either God or the Big Bang. My mob survived the plague, the Industrial Revolution, the British. You know, what did your mob survive? Us, you know, people invading this country. It's amazing that we're even here. I find that miraculous. Anyway, I digress. But whether you look across the spirit, or across science, or across Indigenous worldviews, the truth is we are just an organism. And I love how John Seed used to say, if you don't think you're deeply connected with the earth, hold your breath for 5 minutes. So earth jurisprudence, very quickly. If you've never heard of this book and you're ever bored one day, I'd recommend you have a read. It's written by an old white fella from the US. How ironic. But sometimes it's us white fellas who can critique our own system most effectively. What Thomas Berry gave us in The Great Work was a very cool book, because he basically looks at what he calls these 4 underpinning fundamental establishments that control human affairs: law and government, economics, universities and education, and religion. And he said that they are all deeply anthropocentric, and they all come from, in this sort of Western style globalized world, these deep places in Europe and our Eurocentric views. Anthropocentrism is something that if you ever want to sit and contemplate something while sipping a cup of tea, actually contemplate anthropocentrism, human-centeredness. We rattle it off our tongues, deep ecologists, scientists, but it's actually a really important concept. The 3 key things we've written there are the key elements of human-centeredness is that human beings are the central fact of the universe. They are the final aim and end of everything: evolution, God's plan. These views of thinking that the human is the primary are very old in European culture. And ultimately, the earth exists to satisfy human needs and desires. So what Thomas Berry and others say is that, in fact, the system we have today is a perfectly rolled out, human-centred, growth-focused, elitist system, whereby the living world's been treated like property, trashed, destroyed, and not all human beings have benefited. The elite, whether you look at the kings and queens and the ideas of racial superiority from the Middle Ages that then moved into colonisation, that then saw empire do vile, vile, disgusting things to other people in the name of whether it was religion or greed. And then you go to today, where we see mining companies blowing up ancient places that do not belong to them, or just digging up and destroying places where all the local people and all the local plants and animals would much prefer to live. Then we see these continual attitudes. And as I said, I'm 51 and I've been talking about many good things for 30 years, and I'm still shocked when I meet people who you can see they're still entrenched. The human is primary. It's okay because people need it. They forget that beautiful ball of life, without which any member of that community, other places start to fail. And we're going to see this in our lifetime, these collapse of systems. So AELA's work then was actually directly inspired by Earth jurisprudence. When a few of us were coming together going, yep, we think Earth jurisprudence is a pretty cool thing. How could we turn that? What can we do to implement some of it? So we set up the Australian Earth Laws Alliance to think about earth laws. We started by looking a bit at rights of nature and exploring what does it mean to deeply challenge private property in the Western system, and that is mind-blowing. To unravel that mess is really cool and really hard, but it's important. And a lot of First Nations people have a lot of the solutions, and so does commoning and all these other cool things we've been integrating into NENA. But we realised very early on that to create systems change and to actually do the great work, we had to look across societies, across these jurisdictional and multidisciplinary ways of thinking, and just bring it all back to the living world. So because of the slightly later start and because I ramble a lot, we're a bit behind time. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly, but there's just so much good stuff going on out there. Truly, I am a deep, cynical person and I feel deeply. And the bushfires damn nearly killed me just as a spiritual being who loves plants and animals. However, there is much to be optimistic about. In the last 15 years, we've seen a massive proliferation of rights of nature laws around Australia. Earth laws is becoming this umbrella term. It didn't exist when I did environmental law. I read Chris Stone's Should Trees Have Standing and was so excited, and there was nothing after that. There was nothing. When I came back to the law in 2010, to do my PhD, and had discovered that Ecuador had introduced this rights of nature, it just kind of blew a small hole of cheerfulness in my brain, like, wow, what does this look like? So we now have an entire body of literature and people thinking and working on earth jurisprudence, ecocide laws, which is a remarkable thing to try to push into Western society. We've got rights of nature, we've got legal personhood for nature. More than 20 countries around the world are either engaged in lawmaking or dabbling with this stuff, and there's lots of other social activists. On the other side of this umbrella term are things that I cannot speak for, but I am so excited by. Indigenous first laws. One of the world's oldest continuous legal systems is here in this country, and that's exciting. So much to learn from. One of my Western mates said, I reckon it's deadly. He said, it's kind of like waking up and discovering Aristotle is actually there to have the conversation about logic, because Aboriginal people have their own logic. I said, exactly. Anyway, relationist ethos, laws of obligation, things we are excited about. The rising respect for First Peoples and First Laws. This is seriously different to when I was growing up. The stuff that we're seeing your average white fella engage with, slow but steady they are. I can speak for them because I am one, but it's very, very important and incredible testimony to the resilience and phenomenal governance system of Aboriginal peoples. But there are lots of species in recovery mode in this country. Just the bandicoot the other day, the numbers are up on the bandicoot. The hairy-nosed wombat's doing well. The Blue Mountain City Council, with a little bit of help from AELA, has adopted the rights of nature and ecocentrism and first laws and connecting with Indigenous people as a core underpinning structure for their new council stuff on planetary health. Lots and lots of communities are engaging with this stuff and working with their local councils. The other things we're excited about is the sheer volume of good humans out there. Indigenous mates, all just caring for country, students, youth leaders, the climate movement. I mean, wow. The last 10 years, the rise and rise of young people and others fighting for climate justice. I think we did the numbers the other day. There's something like 17 or 20 current climate litigation cases in the federal court at the moment in Australia. There's been more than 1,000 cases of citizens around the world challenging governments and companies to act on climate change. We know about NRM bodies, land care groups, local catchment groups doing the hard work, wildlife carers, organisations, artists, creatives, through the earth art stuff we do, constantly running into all these incredible people. Faith groups, the Pope's Laudato Si is a call to one of the biggest religious groups in the world, millions and millions and millions of people to become ecocentric and to care for our common home. Laudato Si, we're working with some Catholic Church school mob folks on green prints because they want to roll out some deeper understandings of what the kids can do in their local bioregion. Future dreaming started as a little program inside AELA with me and a couple of my Aboriginal mates, and we decided that we would set it up as its own entity because there's a lot of good work to be done. Future Dreaming Australia, it's all about sharing ecological knowledge to build a better future for all of us. That's our little tagline. It took us a while to work that out. This woman, Mary Graham, absolute legend. Google her immediately upon departing this room. Read some of her work. She will blow your mind. Look up on YouTube. She is prolific. She talks about the deep, deep, deep civilizational culture and governance system of Aboriginal peoples in a way that us whitey people understand. Sorry, I shouldn't be so silly. But, you know, in a way that the philosophical connections are made, the differences in logic, the differences in relationism versus survivalism. Her work is remarkable, and it's one of the privileges of my life to be working on a book with her right now, looking at what could a future look like in Australia if we built it on the relationist ethos. Take all the good stuff from the West, take some of the foundational stuff from the mob, build something else that everyone's cool with, something like that anyway. If I had more time, I could tell you more about her amazing work, but look it up. But then, of course, all the work we were doing in AELA kept running into the economy. So in 2015, in the midst of cancer treatment, when I was lying around, bald-headed and burned up by radiation and chemo, a friend said to me, next year when you're well, I thought that's a lovely assumption to make, do you want to hold a conference and look at social enterprise? I said, no, I want to hold a conference and ask people in civil society if they want to build a new economy network or something, because Australia doesn't have one. Lots of other places have them. We had heaps of academics working on economic work, really terrific people writing papers and you know, the Australia Institute doing stuff, although a lot more now than then. And when we held this conference, we realized we did not even have a shared framing to bring everyone together. There was capitalism, there was socialism, which had sort of failed, and then there was this kind of strange chaos of alternatives. Let me just go to that slide first. Oh, come on, where are you? Yeah, so there was already steady state economics since the 70s. Ecological economics moved out of Herman Daly. Degrowth, social solidarity, sharing economy, collaborative economy, new economy. And then we formed up, I'll go back to what we are, and then wellbeing economy stuff appeared, and that's the good stuff now. Huge momentum around the world. But NINA is a network of organisations and individuals working to create an ecologically healthy and socially just society by kicking it to the economic system. And we are a civil society network, unfunded, driven by volunteers. We have about 6,000 to 7,000 people connected to our networks, 500 paid members. That's tiny, I know, but hey, that's pretty cool for a bunch of volunteers. And the people connected to NINA are some of the best you're ever going to meet, because they are looking at food systems change, community gardens. We've got people in renewable energy, community energy, co-housing, alternative housing modes. We've got everyone challenging post-extractivism. If you look on the NINA website, you'll see we have these sectoral hubs, and it's all about, that's a lovely Looney cartoon. What we're interested in is this well-being. The sectoral hubs are across everything. We've got Indigenous folks involved, finance, banking, commons work, labour, universal basic income. We've had 4 years of everyone bringing all the cool ideas together. And we're just about to draft up a co-created strategy. We're calling it a civil society strategy for a wellbeing economy. And it's a way of trying to show others, folks who aren't involved in NINA yet or want to be, what some of the issues are and what people are standing for and what a different future could look like. And the thing I wanted to share with you is that the rise of wellbeing economics is exciting. Like I said, back in 2016, when we were forming up NINA, there was no other framing that we could leap onto. I grabbed new deliberately. I had read that wonderful book, George Lakoff, Don't Think of an Elephant. Strongly recommend it. He was a linguist, and he would talk about the framing of things and how progressives are constantly framing their work inside the negative framing of the right wing or whatever. And he said, take a framing and just use it. So we decided to go with new economy because it meant nothing and it meant everything, and everyone could find their way together. I'm really proud of the work that NINA's been doing. And now internationally, we've got the wellbeing, in 2017, when we held the conference that announced NINA existed, Bob Costanza, someone who's really important thinker in terms of ecological economics, came to me and said, you guys should become part of this Wellbeing Economy Alliance. It's just forming up. I said, absolutely, we're a founding member. We had no clue what they'd get up to, and they're doing some cool things, very good things. They've got networks and hubs now all around the world. They're developing as much momentum as they can to bring people together. That's the policy guide. Nina is now kind of doing its pluralism thing. We are hosting the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Australia hub. And over the next year or two, we're going to find ways for Nina and We All Australia to be playing and working together in kind of parallel, symbiotically. You like the hand movement? Yeah, cool. We've got no master plan for this. We're just trying to build as many people coming together, showing off to each other the good things they're doing, banging their own drum, helping other people bang their drums. Banging drums is so very good. New Zealand won't go into the wellbeing economy budget. The next year, We All Australia is going to be hammering on to governments about what wellbeing budgets look like, and aren't they amazing? And we've already got our own Australian National Development Index, which folks like Mike Salvaris and others have been working on, and it's awesome. So it's like an alternative to GDP, and it's kind of part of the whole. Everyone talks about, Bhutan's index of happiness. There's a growth. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different ways of measuring. And of course, there's Doughnut economics. Back in 2017, we invited Kate to talk at our online, via Zoom at our conference. You wouldn't even get it today. Her work has gone ballistic and everyone loves it because she has taken the planetary boundaries idea, said, hey, we have to stuff our economic system back into it. The idea itself isn't brand new. Nested sustainability was around in the 80s, was much, much older if you look at other cultures. But it's cool because it's getting traction, and anything that helps people challenge the growth paradigm is good. However, we in Australia have developed our own donut. It's the one on the right. It's part of our Greenprints program. And you'll see that they keep framing the donut as the safe and just space for humanity. We're talking about living space for the whole Earth community. And we just whacked in by our regional foundations and Caring for Country to remind people that you can't just live your life looking at planetary boundaries. You've got to start with local place. And there's a whole body of work that shows you how to and how not to connect planetary boundaries to local stuff. So it's a really big area of work. Greenprints. I was going to give you a run through of Greenprints. I don't think I have time. I do not. But why don't I tell you the website, www.greenprints.org.au. I worked through my cancer treatment on the idea of how do we bring all this good stuff together. And to me, the key problem with our industrialised societies is this expansionist mode. We keep using stuff, and when we run out, we go somewhere else. That's what the Europeans did. They ran out of stuff, so they went somewhere else. How do we do what a lot of the other Indigenous cultures managed to do, which is stay put and live? Now it's all regenerative everything. I'm for it. It's great. But let's make sure we know what we're doing. Greenprints looks simplistic because we've now got it down to 7 or 8 steps about thinking differently. Choosing boundaries for your work could be a catchment, could be your bioregion, but it has to be Westerners saying, where am I doing all this stuff and what are the impacts on my neighbours and my global community? And this is almost unheard of in the legal system or the economic system, actually bounding activity and seeing what's going on. And then there's these other steps. And we're getting a lot of lovely uptake from communities who know there's tons of good stuff out there, but they literally don't know where to start or they don't know where to put the pressure points. So we're helping them gather information and do good things. And I just wanted to end it on, as I mentioned at the beginning or somewhere in my ramble, we are in a bit of a mess. And if you're a thinking, feeling human, particularly the 2019-2020 bushfires would have affected you pretty deeply. But the bleaching of the reef causes deep existential concern to people. And I'm sure up here it's so close to home, sometimes we can't look at grief the way we just can't look directly into the sun. And I heard someone once say that grief is the price of love, meaning you only feel that much if you really love it. And I guess I just wanted to suggest, is gratitude the antidote for grief? Meaning in the hardest of times, it's easy for us to be Pollyanna or it's easy for us to be depressed. But maybe the hardest thing of all is to actually feel that horror and the grief, be grateful for what's left, and to drag ourselves out of our doona and keep working on the things we think are right. And whenever young'uns come to me and say, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? So find the things you love and keep doing the next good thing, because some of it will work. And that's about it from me. So thanks, and I hope I didn't go over time. And if anyone wants to get in touch, that's our slides. Thank you.